Welcome back to Leeds Lately. In today's video, we're going to be talking about newly linked target Jonathan Rowe, who could come in to replace Crescencio Somerville now that he's made his move to West Ham. But before we get into that, make sure you hit that big red button down below. But like I said, we're going to be talking about Jonathan Rowe, and I mentioned him in Jer's podcast the other day about how he would be a good replacement for Somerville if we're trying to replace some of Somerville's goals. Now, Jonathan Rowe is only 21 years old. There is a lot of resale value there. And much like the Morgan Whittaker deal, where I mentioned that we'd mentioned on that podcast that if you went up to the Premier League and it didn't quite work out for somebody like Morgan Whittaker or somebody like Jonathan Rowe, you're definitely going to find a taker for around the same price you bought them for at the bottom end of the Premier League or at the upper end of the Championship. So it's kind of a safe investment. Now, when I mentioned it on the podcast, there was a transfer marked value of around €9 million. Apparently, Leeds are going to go in with a bid of around £7 million. Now, Lockie mentioned that he'd spoken to somebody who was fairly in the know at Norwich, and that they had basically said they're not going to let Jonathan Rowe go for anything under the 20 million because they don't have to sell. So it was news to a lot of us over the last few hours or so, just today, that Jonathan Rowe has been linked with a £7 million move to Leeds. So whether something's changed or whether this is misinformation, we don't know. But we're just going to deal with what we do know, and that is the mould of player that we would be getting if we were to sign him. So, like I said, he's 21 years old. He's got a lot of potential. Obviously, Cree himself was young, and we've got a lot of young players on the wings, and sometimes that's what you need, a little bit of that maverick attitude. Jonathan Rowe is a little bit different of a player to Crescencio Somerville, but similar in some other ways. He's definitely got the pace to stretch the play, so when you want someone standing right out on the touchline or tucking in aside a little bit so that his fullback, Firpo or Bogle, can go past him, because after all, Jonathan Rowe can play on both sides, and he likes to cut in and go through the middle as well. His dribbling is good. I've seen him take on many players and have good shots, left-footed and right-footed. So this plays back into the fact that he can play on the left wing or the right wing. He likes to cut inside and shoot on either side and has scored multiple goals on either side. And speaking of which, this season just gone, last season, 34 matches played in the Championship for Jonathan Rowe, 12 goals and 2 assists. So 14 goal contributions in 34 games. Not bad at all for a winger. Especially a winger as young as he is, only being 21 years old. You would imagine that that only improves with time. I think whilst Norwich were a decent side last season and obviously decent enough to get in the playoffs, Jonathan Rowe would be making an upgrade if he was to come to Leeds, because overall, over the course of that season, whilst yes, we didn't go up through the playoffs, you've got to say that we were a better team throughout the season because we finished in a better position than Norwich. I think it's a better prospect for him if he wants to make it back to the Premier League, because of course he has played there before. I think, to be fair, he was only 19 at the time, but he had a decent amount of games in the Premier League. 13 games he played and got 1 assist last time he was in the Premier League. But we're not focusing on that for now, are we? We're just focusing on what we can control, and that is this season. So, like I said, Jonathan Rowe likes to play on the left or the right, can cut inside, can come through the middle as well, and basically swap. So if you had somebody like Jorginho playing in that 10 and you had somebody like Jonathan Rowe playing out on the right-hand side, you can easily see Jonathan Rowe coming inside with the ball, Jorginho going, okay, now I'm going to go outside on the right, which is where a lot of people say is one of his best positions. So you can see how it would be a little bit more fluid, a little bit more synergy in terms of who's going where, swapping positions and still working within the system. Jonathan Rowe, like I said, he'll stretch the play. He's quick. He gets in behind. When we talked about the Valencia game, and I talked about the Schalke game as well, we had balls going over the top from people like Ampadu, Charlie Crew, and Joe Rothwell as well can play those type of passes. And Gruev as well, actually. We've got a lot of midfielders who can do that. If you've got somebody who can stretch the play, so for example, in the Valencia game, yesterday's video, if you want to go and check that out after this, we highlighted how Dan James has that knowledge that Ampadu can pick him out. He's played with him at Wales, he played with him at Leeds now for a year. He knows that Ampadu can try and pick him out, so he'll make a run beyond the defence, even if the defence is in nice 2 flat banks of 4, ready to defend, ready to sit in a mid block or a low block. Dan James has got that initiative to go, I'm going to go and stretch it right into the corner. And if Ampadu plays it right over the top into the corner and Dan James comes and picks the ball up in by the corner flag, you've instantly bypassed their entire team. They now have to turn and face their own goal. They have to readjust. They have to get back in position. And potentially by that time, Dan James could have whipped a ball in the box. What I think this offers Jonathan Rowe is that you could have that on both sides of the pitch. So the defence can't necessarily get themselves set for it always to go over the top to Dan James or always go over the top to Jonathan Rowe. If there's both options, they kind of have to pick a middle ground, and that's when you get a little bit more space for those wingers. And I think Jonathan Rowe's definitely got the pace to do that. I think whilst in the early stages, I did think Nonto was quite quick. I don't think he's actually as quick as what I thought he was. He's more of a skillful player, but Jonathan Rowe is a bit of both, a bit of skillful, a bit of pace. He's good close control, good finishing in and around the box, arriving at the right time. He's got a good knack of getting in the right place at the right time to score goals. He loves a sort of curled shot around the goalkeeper to his far side. And yeah, he's a very, very good signing for Leeds. It's essentially replacing Somerville with somebody who will replace a decent amount of his goals and will potentially have a resale value if he's not quite ready for the Premier League, or even you could loan him back to the top end of the Championship. But I think he'd do all right. I think with another year under his belt, especially at a team like Leeds under somebody like Daniel Farke, I think he'd do very well. So it'd be interesting to see where this one goes. Let me know what you think of him down in the comments. We're going to have a little look at his statistics now, and it's difficult because when you compare him to attacking midfielders and wingers, because that's essentially where he's played a lot of the time, his statistics aren't the best ever. But when you compare him to midfielders, because he's played in midfield a few times, he then goes right up. So it's swings and roundabouts really. So take it with a pinch of salt. So we're going to compare him to attacking midfielders and wingers because that's where he's been for Leeds. So this is again over the last 365 days. We'll just pick out some key statistics to talk about. His non-penalty goals, obviously, scored 12 goals, puts him 0.53 goals per 90, puts him in the top 3% of midfielders and attacking midfielders and wingers that he's been compared to in similar leagues. Shots total 2.47, so he's taking a decent amount of shots. That's above average at the 68th percentile. Assists, he's quite low, but when you look at shot creating actions, 2.96, so essentially he's creating 3 shots for teammates per 90. Only puts him in the 30th percentile for attacking midfielders and wingers. But I do still think that's a decent amount of chances created. If you can create 3 shooting opportunities for your teammates whilst having 2.5, 3 shots yourself, you're essentially creating 6 shots per 90 for a player. That's not that bad. It looks worse in the statistics, but it's not that bad. Progressive carries, he likes to carry the ball forward, 3.4 per 90, puts him in the 67th percentile. And touches in the attacking penalty area, 4.54, puts him in the 76th percentile. Obviously, shows how much he's involved in the attacking play, and him shooting and scoring from those positions is bared out in the statistics. Successful take-ons as well. Likes to take a player on. I said that, drop a shoulder, go past a couple of players and pick a pass. Hopefully his decision-making is good. I haven't seen a massive amount of him playing in any sort of aspect, to be honest, but I'm hoping that his decision-making is quite good because that's something that we need to improve on from last season. But again, when you look at his tackles and interceptions and stuff, he's in the 90th percentiles for tackles, so he's getting back a lot. When you look at his defensive statistics, interceptions 0.62, blocks 1.01, clearances 0.75, aerials 0.93. That puts him in the 90th percentile for tackles, the 71st percentile for interceptions, the 62nd percentile for blocks, the 72nd percentile for clearances, and the 77th for aerials 1. He's way up there in terms of attacking midfielders and wingers for defensive actions. So that just says to me he does his job well in terms of tracking back. And we know that Daniel Farke likes his wingers to track back. You often see Dan James pulling into, this season it'll be to come back and help Bogle to double up on a winger, or Nonto coming back on the other side. We saw Crescencio Somerville doing that a little bit more last season and taking on those responsibilities. So I think it's a good sign, and that's probably why he's been identified as a target a little bit, because Daniel Farke will know that he works hard. He's obviously also got contacts inside Norwich still, so people will tell him what sort of a player he is. Now, I can't remember whether Daniel Farke actually ever had Jonathan Rowe at Norwich, but if he did, he would have only been about 18 or 19 potentially. So he'll know a bit about him. And so that's probably why he wants to bring him in as well. So I'm hoping that this one happens. It would probably be, for me, the ideal replacement for Crescencio Somerville out on that left-hand side or out on that right-hand side, because we talked about the importance, didn't we, of a player that can play across those positions. Because if you've got somebody who's a left winger, say, right, you've bought somebody who's a left winger, then you get an injury to Dan James and Nonto, right? You've got nobody to play out on the right-hand side. But if somebody like Jonathan Rowe is used to and has experience playing out on that side, shove him out there, no issues whatsoever with him, and you put somebody else out on the left-hand side, like a Brendan Aronson, for example. Flexibility in those sorts of positions is good. I know we've talked about square pegs, round holes before, but flexibility in the sort of winger and number 10 role positions is actually a really good thing to have, because like I said there, if somebody gets injured, you can play multiple people in multiple positions. The other thing is what I talked about at the start of the video is fluidity. The way that Jorginho can drift out wide. We saw it last season as well. Jorginho would drift out wide to the left. Crescencio Somerville might come inside. Somerville and Nonto might swap wings entirely at some points. The fact that you can swap around, it makes defenders have to think twice about what they're doing, because a defender might have prepped to deal with Jorginho. Suddenly he's got Jonathan Rowe barreling past him, and he's got to change and adapt to those situations, and it causes a bit of discourse in opposition defences. So flexibility is a real weapon to have in an attacking midfielder / winger, and I think that Jonathan Rowe's got that in spades. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching Leeds Lately, and I'll see you in the next one.